The warm, salty ocean breeze caressed Tony's face as the plane landed softly at the Bali airport. He glanced down at his wife, Lily, who was smiling with her eyes closed, enjoying the moment. Rosie, their 3-year-old daughter, stared out the window, fascinated by the tropical landscape unfolding before her eyes. "Look, Daddy, palm trees!" Rosie exclaimed enthusiastically, pointing to the tall, slender figures that lined the runway. Tony smiled and stroked his daughter's head, her dark curls shining in the sunlight. "Yes, my love. We are going to spend some incredible days here." Lily opened her eyes and stretched, showing off her slender, toned figure. "I needed this, Tony. A little sun and rest will do us wonders." As they exited the airport, a blast of hot air enveloped them. The smell of sea salt and tropical vegetation filled the air. A chauffeur awaited them with a sign that read, "Familia Espejo," and guided them to an elegant black car. "It's like a dream," murmured Lily, observing the scenery as the car took them to their resort. "I can't believe we're finally here." Tony nodded, his mind still on the hustle and bustle of his business, but determined to disconnect and enjoy time with his family. He had worked tirelessly to build his cryptocurrency mining company, and this was a well-deserved reward. They arrived at the resort, a luxury paradise surrounded by lush gardens and white sand beaches. Rosie ran towards the water, her laughter echoing in the air. "Careful, Rosie," warned Lily, though with a smile on her lips. "Let her enjoy herself," said Tony, taking his wife's hand. "Let's go explore a little." Walking together along the beach, they felt the tension of recent months dissolve with every step. The hot sand under their feet, the constant murmur of the waves, and the golden sun created an atmosphere of tranquility that neither of them had experienced in a long time. That night, they had dinner at a restaurant by the beach, with torches illuminating their table and the sound of the sea as a backdrop. Tony ordered a bottle of wine, and they toasted the holidays. "To a new beginning," Tony said, raising his glass. "To us," Lily replied with a knowing look. "To Bali!" shouted Rosie, raising her glass of juice, making her parents laugh. The waiter brought a series of local dishes, full of exotic colors and aromas. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, with laughter and shared memories. Lily talked about how good it felt to be back in shape after pregnancy, and Tony looked at her with pride and love. "You're amazing," Tony said, taking Lily's hand. Lily smiled, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. "Tony, sometimes I worry about you. You work so much. I don't want you to burn out." Tony squeezed her hand gently. "I know, love. But I do it for us. For Rosie. I want us to have a comfortable and safe life." "And we do," Lily replied, looking into his eyes. "But I don't want to lose you in the process." Tony nodded, knowing she was right. "I promise I'll try to balance things better. This trip is the beginning." After dinner, they strolled along the beach, Rosie running around them. The moon shone on the ocean, creating a silver path on the water. They stopped for a moment, simply enjoying the silence and each other's company. "I love you, Lily," Tony said suddenly, his voice full of emotion. "And I love you, Tony," Lily replied, leaning in to kiss him. Rosie watched them curiously, and then, with the innocence of a child, asked, "Are we going to stay here forever?" Tony laughed and lifted her into his arms. "I wish we could, my love, but we have to go home soon. For now, let's enjoy every moment." That night, while Rosie slept soundly in her crib, Tony and Lily sat on the balcony of their room, watching the stars. Under the starry sky of Bali, the Espejo family began their vacation, oblivious to the challenges that awaited them upon returning home, but determined to enjoy every moment of their time together in this tropical paradise. Tony woke up early, as always. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, and the first rays of light were timidly entering through the curtains. He got up carefully so as not to wake Lily and went to the balcony of the resort room in Bali. The view of the ocean was impressive, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore helped him to collect his thoughts. "Good morning, honey," Lily said, appearing behind him and hugging him around the waist. "Thinking about work already?" Tony smiled and gently kissed his wife's forehead. "Just a little. I can't help it. But I'm here, with you, and that's what matters." Lily sighed, but smiled. "Let's have breakfast. Rosie is already awake, and it seems that she has brought all the sand from the beach to bed." Breakfast was a mixture of laughter and lively chatter. Tony was enjoying every moment, but his mind couldn't help but wander back to his business. After a few days of vacation, it was hard to completely disconnect. Later, while Lily and Rosie were playing in the pool, Tony let himself be carried away by memories. It all started a few years ago, with an idea and a lot of hard work. He remembered the days when his office was just a small rented room full of cables and machines. "Mr. Espejo, we need to adjust the server settings," said Luis, one of his first employees, on one of those long nights. Tony nodded without looking up from his screen. "Do it. We can't afford any failures right now. Every minute counts." That was just the beginning. With each new step, Tony learned more about the world of cryptocurrencies. His dedication and attention to detail led him to rapidly expand his business. Every decision was calculated, every risk measured. He hired the best engineers and technicians, invested in state-of-the-art equipment, and was always one step ahead of the market. "We need to expand our operations to the north," Tony said at a meeting with his partners. "The cost of electricity is much lower there, and we can maximize our profits." His partners looked at him skeptically, but they trusted his judgment. Tony had proven time and again that he knew what he was doing. Over time, he opened new branches, and his company became a recognized name in the world of cryptocurrencies. Returning to the present, Tony watched his family. Lily laughed as Rosie splashed in the water. That balance between his professional and personal life was not always easy to maintain. He remembered the nights when he would come home late, finding Lily asleep on the couch, waiting for him. "I'm sorry, love. The meeting went longer than expected," he would say, feeling guilty. Lily always understood, but Tony knew that she was sacrificing a lot for his work. He decided that this trip was an opportunity to redeem himself, to show that he could be the present husband and father his family needed. "Dad, come swim with us," shouted Rosie from the pool. Tony smiled and approached, letting the warm water and his daughter's laughter envelop him. Lily looked at him with a mixture of love and understanding in her eyes. "You're doing a good job, Tony," she said as he played with Rosie. "Thanks, Vero. Sometimes I feel like it's not enough that I should spend more time with you. The important thing is that you're here now. That's what counts." That afternoon, while Rosie was taking a nap, Tony and Lily sat on the balcony, enjoying a glass of wine. "Remember when this all started?" Tony asked, breaking the silence. Lily nodded. "Of course I do. It was a difficult time, but it was worth it. Look at all you've accomplished." "I didn't do it alone. You were by my side every step of the way." "And I always will be," Lily replied, taking his hand. The conversation continued, reminiscing about the good times and the challenges they had faced together. Tony realized how much Lily had sacrificed, her unconditional support, and her strength. This reflection made him value even more every moment they shared. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange and pink hues. Tony felt an inner peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. This trip was not just a break, It was an opportunity to reconnect, to reaffirm his commitment to his family. The plane landed smoothly at the Madrid airport. The Espejo family was returning home after an unforgettable vacation in Bali. Tony watched Rosie's sleepy face as she rested in his arms while Lily collected the suitcases with a tired but satisfied smile. "Ready to get back to routine?" Tony asked, trying to keep his tone light. Lily nodded, though there was a shadow of worry in her eyes. "Yes, though it's always difficult after such wonderful days." The taxi ride from the airport to their home was quiet. The streets of Madrid were lit by the city lights, and the usual hustle and bustle seemed muffled by the family's return to normalcy. Lily settled into the back seat, staring out the window with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about?" Tony asked, breaking the silence. "I'm just grateful for this time together. Bali was perfect." Lily smiled, but Tony noticed the melancholy in her voice. Upon arriving home, the routine quickly resumed. Rosie returned to kindergarten, Tony immersed himself in his work, and Lily resumed her daily activities. However, the peace and happiness they had experienced in Bali soon faded in the whirlwind of everyday life. One rainy afternoon, Tony received a call that would change his life forever. He was in an important meeting when his phone vibrated insistently in his pocket. Seeing Lily's number, he decided to answer quickly. "Hello, love. Is everything okay?" Tony asked, trying to sound calm. "Mr. Espejo, this is Dr. Hernandez from the General Hospital. Your wife has been in a car accident and is in critical condition. You need to come immediately." Tony's world stopped. He felt his air supply cut off and the ground crumble beneath him. Without a word, he hurried out of the meeting room, leaving his colleagues bewildered. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Lily in the emergency room, surrounded by doctors and nurses. Her face was pale and covered in cuts, and she was breathing with difficulty. Tony approached her, his heart breaking. "I'm here, Lily. I'm here," he murmured, taking her cold hand. Doctors worked frantically, but Tony could see in their faces that the situation was serious. He stayed by her side, never taking his eyes off his wife, feeling a despair he had never known before. Hours later, a doctor came out and addressed Tony with a grim expression. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Espejo. We did everything we could, but her injuries were too severe. Lily didn't make it." Tony felt the world go dark. The pain was unbearable, an open wound in his heart that wouldn't stop bleeding. He collapsed into a chair, unable to process what he had heard. The following days were a blur of sadness and confusion. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt empty and cold. Rosie, too young to fully understand the magnitude of the loss, constantly asked about her mother. "When is Mommy coming back?" she would ask innocently, looking at her father with big, hopeful eyes. Tony had no answers. He could only hug her and cry silently, feeling that the pain would never go away. Carmen, the family's nanny and housekeeper, became a pillar of support. She took care of Rosie and tried to keep the house running, although the atmosphere was tense and gloomy. "Mr. Espejo, you need to eat something," Carmen said one night, leaving a tray of food on the table next to him. "You can't go on like this." Tony looked up, his eyes red and swollen from crying. "I'm not hungry, Carmen. I don't know how to go on without her." Carmen sighed and sat down opposite him. "I know it's hard, but Rosie needs you. She needs her father. Lily would want you to stay strong for her." Tony nodded slowly, sensing the truth in Carmen's words. But the weight of grief was overwhelming, and every day was a struggle to get out of bed. The nights were the worst. Tony would find himself alone in his room, staring at the empty space in the bed where Lily used to sleep. He remembered the happy moments, the shared laughter, the promises of a future together. Now all that seemed like a distant, unattainable dream. Dawn at the Espejo house arrived silent and sad. Since Lily's death, the days seemed endless, and the nights even more so. Tony, a shadow of his former self, had put aside his daily activities. He spent most of his time locked in his office, with a bottle of whiskey as his only company. "Mr. Espejo, would you like some breakfast?" Carmen asked from the doorway, her voice full of concern. Tony looked up, his eyes glazed and weary. "No, Carmen, I'm not hungry. But you need to eat something. Rosie needs you too," she insisted gently, trying to reach the part of him that still cared for his daughter. Tony sighed, but did not answer. Carmen, not losing hope, decided to take care of Rosie, who was sitting in the kitchen, drawing. "How are you today, Rosie?" Carmen asked, sitting down next to her. Rosie looked at Carmen with her big, sad eyes. "I miss Mommy. Why can't she come back?" Carmen took a deep breath. It was difficult to explain death to such a young girl. "Mommy is in heaven, my love. But she will always be with you, in your heart and in your memories. Daddy doesn't play with me anymore. He's always sad and drinking something that smells bad," Rosie said, frowning. Carmen stroked the girl's hair. "Daddy is very sad, just like you. But in time, he will be better, and we have to help him." Rosie nodded slowly, though she still didn't quite understand. "Can we make him a drawing to make him feel better?" "Of course we can. I'm sure that would make him very happy." While Rosie concentrated on her drawing, Carmen went back to Tony's office, determined to make him understand that he had to change for the good of his daughter. "Tony, you have to talk to her. Rosie needs you more than ever." Tony looked up, his expression full of pain. "I don't know how to do it, Carmen. I don't know how to go on without Lily. Nobody said it would be easy. But you have Rosie, and she needs her father. She needs to feel that you haven't abandoned her too." Tony nodded slowly, knowing Carmen was right, but the guilt and sadness were overwhelming. "I'll try. I just need a little more time." Carmen left the office, knowing she had done what she could for the time being. She concentrated on keeping the house in order and taking care of Rosie, but her concern for Tony grew each day. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, she came across a photograph of the family taken during their trip to Bali. The picture showed all three of them smiling, full of life and joy. Carmen felt a pang in her heart. The house that was once filled with laughter was now steeped in sadness. Determined to help, Carmen began to include Tony in small daily activities. One morning, she asked him to accompany her to the supermarket. Another, to help Rosie with her homework. Slowly, with much effort, Tony began to emerge from his self-imposed confinement. "Dad, look at the drawing I made for you," Rosie said one afternoon, handing him a sheet full of colors. Tony took the drawing and looked at it, his eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful, Rosie. Thank you." Rosie snuggled up next to him on the sofa. "I miss you, Daddy. I want you to play with me again." Tony hugged his daughter, feeling the weight of his responsibility as a father. "I will, honey. I promise I will." That night, after putting Rosie to bed, Tony sat in the kitchen with Carmen. "I don't know what we would do without you, Carmen. You have been our pillar. It's my job, and more than that, I care a lot about this family," Carmen replied, smiling slightly. "Lily would want you to move on, for you and for Rosie." Tony nodded, knowing he had to. "I know, it won't be easy, but I'm going to try." From that day on, Tony made a conscious effort to be more present. He began taking Rosie to the park, helping her with her homework, and reading her stories before bed. Carmen, always close by, continued to support him every step of the way. The recovery process was slow and painful, but every little step forward was a victory. Tony knew he would never fully get over Lily's loss, but he also understood that he had to live for his daughter, who depended on him. One afternoon, as they were walking through the park, Rosie took her father's hand. "I love you, Daddy." Tony looked at his daughter, feeling a mixture of sadness and hope. "And I love you, Rosie. Always." Carmen watched them from a nearby bench, feeling a deep satisfaction. She knew that although the road was long and difficult, together they could overcome it. And in those small moments of connection and love, she found the strength to carry on. The struggle to cope with the loss continued, but with Carmen's support and Rosie's innocence, Tony began to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Tony was reviewing the company reports meticulously when the phone rang on his desk. On the other end of the line, his secretary's voice was tense. "Mr. Espejo, there is a young lady named Susan who has come to deliver her resume. She says she is very interested in working with us." Tony looked up, somewhat surprised by the unexpected visit. "Send her in, Adela." Susan entered the office with a warm and confident smile. She was wearing a simple but elegant suit, and her eyes sparkled with determination. "Good morning, Mr. Espejo. It is an honor to meet you. I have heard a lot about your company and would love to be part of your team." Tony looked at her carefully, assessing her demeanor. "Good morning, Susan. Please have a seat. Tell me a little about your experience." As Susan spoke, Tony couldn't help but notice her professionalism and the precision with which she addressed each topic. She seemed to be the perfect candidate. However, what Tony didn't know was that behind that facade hid a much darker agenda. John Salas, Tony's rival, had been closely following the meteoric rise of Tony's cryptocurrency company. From his office, John watched with envy as Tony landed major contracts and expanded his business. Each of Tony's successes was another thorn in John's pride. "We can't let this upstart outshine us," John said, slamming his fist on the table. "We have to find a way to stop him." His gaze turned to his daughter, Susan, who was sitting in the other corner of the office, listening silently. John had always been an ambitious man, and he expected his daughter to share that same hunger for power. "Susan, I need you to do something for the family." John's voice was firm, leaving no room for objection. "I need you to infiltrate Tony's company and find out his weaknesses. We need to find a way to bring him down." Susan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the responsibility her father was placing on her. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dad." Susan started working at Tony's company with dedication and apparent enthusiasm. Her co-workers found her friendly and efficient, and she soon earned the trust of many. But, inside, Susan struggled with the pressure of living up to her father's expectations while maintaining her facade. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents in her office, Tony stopped at the door. "Everything all right in here, Susan?" he asked. She looked up, smiling. "Yes, Mr. Espejo. I was just finishing reviewing these reports." Tony nodded. "You've been doing a good job. It's hard to find someone so committed and competent." "Thank you, Mr. Espejo. It's a pleasure working here." Every day at Tony's company, Susan looked for opportunities to sabotage. She started with small acts, like altering data in reports or delaying important deliveries. She did it subtly, so as not to arouse suspicion. However, each small success brought her closer to her ultimate goal. One morning, while everyone was in a meeting, Susan sneaked into Tony's office. She searched through the papers and files, trying to find information that she could use against him. Her hands trembled slightly, aware of how risky this was. "What are you doing here?" The voice of Adela, Tony's secretary, made her spin around. "Oh, I was just looking for some documents that Mr. Espejo asked me to review," Susan replied with an innocent smile. Adela frowned, but said nothing. Susan left the office quickly, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Days passed, and the tension increased. Susan knew she was walking on a tightrope, but she couldn't stop. Loyalty to her father and the need to prove herself pushed her forward. One night, while reviewing more documents in her apartment, she received a call from John. "How are things going?" he asked, without preamble. "I'm making progress, Dad, but it's not easy. Tony is very meticulous." "I don't want excuses, Susan. I want results." The call ended abruptly, leaving Susan with a feeling of emptiness and anxiety. She knew she had to act fast. John was not a patient man, and the pressure to fulfill her mission was mounting every day. Susan had spent weeks gaining the trust of Tony and his employees. Her impeccable behavior and apparent dedication to the company had made her a respected and trusted figure. But behind that facade, Susan was preparing a sinister plan. She had begun to integrate herself more into Tony's personal life. She accepted invitations to family dinners and was always willing to help. Her goal was clear: to get close enough to be able to execute her plan without arousing suspicion. One afternoon, while sharing a meal at Tony's house, Susan carefully observed every detail. Carmen was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and Rosie was playing in the garden under Tony's watchful eye. "This house is beautiful," Susan commented, looking at Tony. "You must be very proud." "I am. Lily and I worked hard to have all of this," Tony replied with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Susan smiled and raised her glass. "To Lily, and to all the happy moments you shared." Tony nodded, toasting in silence. Susan knew her comment had struck a chord, and she used it to get even closer. Her plan was in motion. That night, Susan stayed late, helping Carmen clean up after dinner. She carefully observed the movements of the house, making sure she knew every corner. "Carmen, that was a wonderful dinner. Thank you for everything," Susan said with a warm smile. "You're welcome, Susan. It's a pleasure to have you here," Carmen replied, suspecting nothing. When everyone retired to their rooms, Susan stayed in the living room, mentally reviewing her plan. She had to be meticulous. She couldn't afford any mistakes. The next day, taking advantage of the fact that Tony was in a meeting away from the house, Susan executed the first part of her plan. She went to the pool and carefully poured a liquid into the water. It was an odorless and tasteless poison, designed to cause disorientation and loss of consciousness. Later, as Carmen and Rosie were playing near the pool, Susan joined them with a smile. "Why don't you get in the water? It's so refreshing today." "Yes, let's go swimming," Rosie exclaimed, running to the edge of the pool. Carmen, ever vigilant, smiled. "Okay, but just for a little while, Rosie." Susan waited patiently for the poison to take effect. First, Carmen began to feel dizzy, and then Rosie. I don't feel well," Carmen said, her voice weak and faint. Rosie, beside her, began to lose consciousness. Susan watched coldly as both slowly sank into the water. A few minutes later, Juan, the pool cleaner, arrived to do his routine work. As he got closer, he saw the motionless bodies of Carmen and Rosie floating in the water. He ran towards them, pulling them out of the water desperately. "My God! Help! Somebody! Help!" Juan shouted, trying to revive them. Meanwhile, Susan watched from a window, her expression impassive. Everything was going according to plan. Tony arrived shortly after, alarmed by the screams. Seeing the scene, his heart stopped. He ran to the pool, taking his daughter's inert body in his arms. "Rosie, no, please, no!" he sobbed, trying to revive her unsuccessfully. Carmen was unconscious but still breathing. Juan continued his resuscitation attempts as Tony clung to little Rosie. "Call an ambulance, quick!" Tony shouted, his voice full of despair. The hospital confirmed the worst. Rosie had not survived. Tony collapsed in a chair, unable to process the horror of the situation. His tears fell silently as he felt an overwhelming guilt. Carmen, although alive, was in critical condition. Doctors did their best to stabilize her, but her prognosis was uncertain. Susan, maintaining her facade of concern, approached Tony at the hospital. "Tony, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine the pain you're feeling." Tony looked at her with tear-filled eyes. "My daughter? My little Rosie? How could this happen?" "I don't know, Tony. It was a terrible accident. I'm here for whatever you need," Susan said, showing no real emotion. The following weeks were hell for Tony. He blamed himself for not being there, for not protecting his family. Every corner of the house reminded him of Rosie, and the pain was unbearable. Carmen, after a long battle, began to show signs of recovery, but the road would be long and full of obstacles. Meanwhile, Susan continued with her plan. She knew the blow had been devastating to Tony, and that her next move would be crucial to destroying his company and his spirit. The Espejo house was steeped in a deathly silence. The pain of Rosie's loss had left an indelible mark on Tony's soul. The funeral arrangements were proceeding with a mechanical coldness, every detail a reminder of the tragedy. Tony was in Rosie's room, surrounded by her toys and drawings. A rag doll lay on the bed, and Tony, with trembling hands, bent down to pick it up. At that moment, something strange caught his attention. A slight movement in Rosie's chest. He thought his mind was playing a cruel trick on him, but the movement was repeated. "Carmen!" he shouted desperately, his voice broken with emotion. "Carmen! Come quickly!" Carmen came running, still weak from her own recovery, but as she saw the scene, her eyes filled with hope. Rosie was alive, her breathing barely perceptible but constant. "Call an ambulance, Tony. Right now," Carmen said, her voice firm and determined. The medical team arrived within minutes, carrying Rosie away on a stretcher. Tony clung to his daughter's hand, his mind struggling to accept the miraculous reality. Hours later at the hospital, a doctor approached Tony and Carmen. "Your daughter is in critical condition, but stable. It was a miracle that she survived. We will need to monitor her closely." Tony sank into a chair, exhausted but relieved. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you." A few days later, as Tony sat by Rosie's bedside, remembering recent events, a sense of unease began to grow inside him. Something didn't add up. The alleged chlorine leak, the way it had all happened, couldn't be just a coincidence. "Carmen, can you come here for a moment?" Tony called, without taking his eyes off his daughter. Carmen approached, still with a slight limp. "What is it, Tony?" "I've been thinking about the accident. Something's not right. Who else had access to the pool that day?" Carmen frowned, pondering. "Besides us, only Susan was around. She was the one who alerted Juan to the filter problem." Tony felt a chill run down his spine. Susan had always been efficient, but there was something about her attitude that now seemed suspicious to him. He decided to investigate further. With the help of a friend in the police, Tony gained access to the security cameras at the house. What he saw chilled him to the bone. Susan tampering with the pool filter minutes before the accident. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. That night, Tony confronted Susan in the office. "What were you trying to do, Susan?" he asked, his voice controlled but full of anger. Susan, caught, tried to remain calm. "I don't know what you're talking about, Tony. I saw it on the security cameras. You tampered with the filter. You tried to kill my daughter," he shouted, losing his composure. Susan slumped, her facade of calm disappearing. "You don't understand. I had to do it. My father, John, made me." The police arrived shortly after, and Susan was arrested. During questioning, she revealed the truth about her father's pressure and manipulations. John, obsessed with destroying Tony, had used his own daughter as a pawn in his twisted game. Susan's flashbacks showed John, a ruthless and cruel man, instilling in her an unfounded hatred for Tony. Every action Susan had taken was a desperate search for approval, distorted by her father's toxic influence. As the investigation progressed, the true magnitude of Susan and John's actions was revealed. Tony's company had been sabotaged on multiple fronts, and trust in his environment had been systematically destroyed. Tony, though devastated by the betrayal, found solace in the fact that the truth had come to light. Rosie was slowly recovering, and Carmen, with her unwavering strength, remained a pillar in his life. One afternoon, as Rosie played in the garden under Carmen's watchful eye, Tony reflected on everything that had happened. The loss, the pain, and the eventual revelation of the truth had been a trial he would never forget. Tony got up early, as usual. His mind was clearer than it had been in weeks, filled with determination. The memory of Rosie, now safe but still affected by recent events, spurred him to action. He knew the legal battle ahead would be arduous, but he was determined to protect his family and seek justice. "Today is the day, Carmen," Tony said as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "I'm going to face John and his daughter. I won't let them destroy us." Carmen nodded, her gaze firm and supportive. "We're with you, Tony. I'll do everything I can to help." Tony picked up the file of evidence he had been compiling. Hours of meticulous work and conversations with private investigators had finally paid off. He had enough evidence to bring John and Susan to justice. The courtroom was abuzz with whispers as Tony entered. John and Susan were there, their faces a mixture of defiance and worry. The tension in the air was palpable. Tony took his seat next to his lawyer. "Everything is going to be fine, Tony," his lawyer said, reviewing the documents one last time. "We have a solid case." The session began, and the prosecutor presented the evidence. Recordings, forged documents and testimonies were shown that incriminated Susan in the sabotage and attempted murder of Carmen and Rosie. These acts not only demonstrated a total lack of professional ethics, but also a clear intention to cause physical and emotional harm to the Espejo family, said the prosecutor, pointing to Susan and John. The defense tried to refute the evidence, but the accumulation of evidence was overwhelming. Tony watched every move, every word, with a mixture of hope and fear. During a recess, Carmen approached Tony and took his hand. "You are very brave, Tony. Rosie is proud of you." Tony squeezed Carmen's hand, feeling a warm current of support that gave him strength. "Thank you, Carmen. I don't know what I would do without you." The session resumed, and finally it was Tony's turn to take the stand. His testimony was clear and emotional. He described the horrors his family had experienced and the betrayal he had felt upon discovering the truth about Susan. "I trusted her. I gave her a chance in my company, and she tried to destroy everything we've built," Tony said, his voice firm but charged with emotion. "She wasn't just trying to ruin my business. She endangered the life of my daughter." The judge listened intently, nodding gravely. Finally, after several hours of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. I find John Salas and Susan Salas guilty on all charges filed against them. They are sentenced to prison, the judge announced, slamming the gavel. Tony felt a wave of relief and victory. Justice had prevailed, and his family was safe. He stood up, hugging Carmen and his lawyer. "We did it," he said, tears in his eyes. The following weeks were a process of rebuilding. Tony focused on revitalizing his company and restoring normalcy to his home. Carmen was by his side every step of the way, providing the support and stability they both needed. "The company is starting to recover, and things at home are getting better too," Tony remarked one night as they were having dinner together. "All thanks to you, Carmen." Carmen smiled, her presence always calming. "We did this together, Tony, and we'll keep moving forward together." The relationship between Tony and Carmen grew stronger over time. Small moments of intimacy and mutual understanding became the basis for a deeper connection. Rosie, although still affected, began to show signs of recovery, her laughter slowly returning. One day, as they were walking through the garden, Tony stopped and looked at Carmen. "Carmen, I don't know how to express how grateful I am for everything you've done. You have been our pillar in the darkest of times." Carmen looked into his eyes, her expression soft but firm. "Tony, I will always be here for you and Rosie. We are a family, and that will never change." Tony nodded, feeling a peace he had not felt in a long time. "Yes, we are, and together we can overcome anything." With Carmen by his side and Rosie growing stronger, he knew that although the road had been hard, they were building a future filled with hope and love. The morning sun bathed the Espejo house in a soft golden light. Tony got up early, as always, but this time with a feeling of renewed hope. He had spent months rebuilding his life and that of his family, and today was a special day. He walked to the kitchen where he found Carmen preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Carmen," Tony greeted with a smile. "Good morning, Tony. Did you sleep well?" she replied, pouring coffee. "Yes, much better, thank you." The sound of Rosie's little footsteps broke the silence. The girl entered the kitchen, still sleepy, but with a smile on her face. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Carmen," Rosie said, coming closer to hug them. "Good morning, my love," they replied in unison, their voices full of affection. After breakfast, they decided to spend the day at the beach. It was an opportunity to relax and enjoy time together, something they all needed. As they drove towards the coast, the atmosphere in the car was light and full of laughter. Rosie told stories about her classes and the friends she had made. Upon reaching the beach, the sound of the waves and the smell of salt air enveloped them. They found a quiet spot and spread out their towels. Carmen sat down, watching Rosie run towards the water. "She's recovering well, don't you think?" Carmen said, looking at Tony. "Yes. Every day I see her stronger. Thanks to you, Carmen. I don't know how I would have handled all this without your support," Tony replied, his voice full of sincerity. Carmen smiled, but her eyes revealed something deeper. "Tony, we are a family. We support each other. That's what we do." Tony nodded, feeling a wave of emotion. He sat down next to Carmen, their hands brushing slightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the waves and Rosie's laughter filled the air. "Carmen, I've been thinking about us a lot," Tony finally said, breaking the silence. "You and Rosie are the most important thing in my life. I don't want to lose that." Carmen looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise and tenderness. "Tony, I've thought about us too. What we've been through has brought us together in a way I never imagined. You and Rosie are my family. At that moment, words were not necessary. Understanding and love were clear in their eyes. Tony took Carmen's hand, squeezing it gently. They felt the deep connection that bound them, a silent promise of a future together. The afternoon passed in a blur of simple happiness. They played in the sand, built castles, and swam in the sea. Rosie's laughter was contagious, and every moment they shared strengthened their bond. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with orange and pink hues, they sat together on the shore, watching the horizon. Rosie, exhausted but happy, snuggled between Tony and Carmen. "Dad, can we come to the beach every weekend?" Rosie asked, her eyes half closed. "Of course, my love. Anytime you want," Tony replied, kissing his daughter's forehead. Carmen stroked Rosie's hair, whispering, "Yes, we will always be together." That night, back home, peace and serenity filled the air. Tony and Carmen, after putting Rosie to bed, stayed in the living room, enjoying the shared silence. "Tony, we've been through a lot, but I feel like we're on the right track. Don't you think so?" Carmen said, her voice soft but sure. "Yes, Carmen, I feel like we're finally where we're supposed to be, and I know that whatever happens, we'll face it together." The bond between Tony and Carmen had evolved, strengthened by the challenges they had overcome. Every small gesture, every moment shared, was a reaffirmation of their love and commitment. The future was still uncertain, but it was full of possibilities. Tony and Carmen planned together, with dreams and hopes for their little family. They knew there would be challenges, but they were ready to face them, united by love and determination. The next day, they decided to take Rosie on an outing to a nearby park. As they walked the trails, observing nature and enjoying each other's company, Tony felt a peace he had not experienced in a long time. "Thank you, Carmen, for everything," Tony said, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Tony, for being my family." With that silent promise, the Espejo family embraced their new beginning, with hope and strength. And as they walked together towards the future, they knew that no matter what challenges they faced, they would always have each other. And so ends the moving story of Tony and Carmen. Throughout this journey full of challenges and emotions, we have seen how the power of love and determination can overcome even the most difficult trials. If this story has touched your heart and inspired you, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family. And above all, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories full of excitement, intrigue, and life lessons. Your support is very important to us and helps us to continue creating quality content. So, click on the subscribe button and activate the bell to receive notifications of new videos. Thank you for joining us on this journey and for being part of our community. See you in the next video.